I just wanted to give a shout out to my colleagues in nephrology. For those of you that know Dr. Rob Quinn, I think he's considered an expert in presentations at really nice delivery. And so I just participated actually in a workshop that Dr. Quinn led, and he had made some suggestions and recommendations. So I'm kind of using the Rob Quinn method for presenting. So I hope you enjoy it. I look forward to some feedback, but this is really, he said, your job is not to regurgitate statistics and garbage information from your studies. Your job is to entertain. So I hope that this is entertaining and that you enjoy this, and hang on tight, folks. So it's going to be kind of those weird, well, I'm setting myself up for maybe failure, Karen, sorry. But Karen and I really enjoyed putting this together. So we'll just sort of jump in. Hopefully everybody can see the slides. Sumi, thank you for the land acknowledgement. For those of you that want to pop in the chat, if you're outside of the traditional lands at Calgary or outside of the Treaty 7, please share the information in the chat room. But I know Karen and I, we were talking about this, and it's just like, especially with the weather getting better, it is just such a beautiful place to live and work and play. And so we're very, very proud and to be living here and sharing this amazing place. So thanks to Meet again for the more formal acknowledgement. And so, you know, again, when Karen and I were putting this together, we thought we'd share with a bit of a personal story. I get asked a lot, you know, why did you go into patient engagement? And oh gosh, it started like, I know I'm not starting from the day I was born, but it must have been about 15 years ago. And I had the privilege and the opportunity to actually work on a project where I spoke with individuals, so patients, in some situations, not all, because most had passed away because they were recipients of bad blood products. And so bringing them together was really a conversation to understand from their perspective what happened, the impact of losing their loved one to something like this, and what could this organization learn from what happened. So it was really from that perspective, but it was probably the hardest thing I ever did in my life, but I was immediately hooked. It was raw, it was emotional, it was honest, it was transformative. Excuse me. So transformative for both me and the people that I spoke with, because it was, yeah, it was just, it's so powerful. And it had the biggest impact. I'd never seen that before. I mean, you know, you go to conferences and sessions and you do these breakout thing and blah, blah. No, this was like nothing I'd ever participated in before. And so fast forward to many, many years later, I thought, I want to do a PhD, and I want to do a PhD in patient and family engagement because I want to learn more about it. And, you know, if we have time, we can chat about that a little bit later, but that was really why I got involved. Karen, I know I should have said this, sorry, I apologize at the beginning. Karen has not been feeling super wonderful for the last past couple of weeks. So Karen's kind of like, she's riding along. And so she's going to add and contribute and answer questions and all that kind of stuff. But I really wanted her to take the bulk of the presentation because this is her work. And I wanted her to have that spotlight because I'm so proud of everything that she did. And so, but again, Karen, I know you're not feeling great. And so I just really appreciate you being here. So I should have said that at the beginning. I'm sorry, my friend. I know I was we were telling Samid that, but I forgot to tell everybody else on the call. So I'm so sorry. So unfortunately, everybody gets stuck with me in the presentation. But Karen, do you want to talk a little bit about why you got involved, like your personal story about what brought you here? Okay, great, please.
Sure, thanks, Tamara. I experienced some bad stuff happen to me in the hospital. And because of that, I came away very angry at the system, and I did not know where to put that anger. And shortly after that, a mutual friend of Tamara and mine introduced Tamara to me, and I started working along with her on her PhD. And because of that 4 years with Tamara, really really ingrained in me the need for the patient voice. So I have gone on to do quite a few things because of that. So basically, the beginning of my journey was with Tamara, and the pacer was with Tamara too. So it's become full circle for us. Tamara and I are a tag team. But that's the beginning for me. I just didn't know where to put that anger. So this has allowed me to sort of share my story about my experiences and hopefully plant a little seed somewhere along the way to make some changes. And that's my story.
Awesome. And I mean, I like to call Karen my partner in crime, but this really, I know you're probably wondering, like, what's with this cupcake and why are we staring at this cupcake? But to me, research and patient engagement is like this perfect little cupcake. So the cake part is the research, and the patient and family involvement is the icing. And for those of you that have had, like, there's nothing better. For those of you that haven't had a perfect cupcake, I'm sorry. And maybe cupcake sales will go, like go through the roof. But it's like that moist, delicate, lovely cake. And I don't like it too sweet icing. I'm not a super sweet, like, kind of girl. I like it so that it just complements it. And so this is how I really believe this. And so it's that, that collaboration, that working together. It truly makes that perfect cupcake. And like any recipe, I mean, if you mess up on the ingredients or put too much of something or too little of something, you could wreck that cupcake, excuse me, and the taste of that cupcake. So it's a little bit of balance. And so I hope to get into a little bit more detail as we go on, but that's the cupcake. So that's our personal story. And that's why we're both here. For those of you that are looking at this going, what is this? So it's a QR code. So for those of you that have a smartphone, hold it up to the screen and you'll be immediately taken to the study that we're going to be talking about today. And I know Samit sent out the link, but this is just sort of a really quick way to sort of get it on your phones or on your computers or whatever you're doing. And so for any of you that wants to know how it works, I'm happy to explain it later, but this is the story. But I also wanted to talk about, there's two studies that are kind of linked completely. So the first one is a scoping review, and this is the QR code. The study that we're talking about today is something that often never gets published. It's the how we worked with patient partners during the scoping review. And that's what we're going to talk about. But I'm going to sort of share some highlights from the work for those of you that are interested. But for those diehard people that just want to know the results of the scoping review, that's the QR code for you. Okay, so some details about, how we started working together. This was part of my postdoctoral work. And so I put out some advertisements. I was looking for 5 patient partners. Well, actually, I didn't know how many patient partners I wanted, but I just put out a notice and sort of said, I'm looking for patient partners, distributed it through my own personal network and, Alberta Spore and a few others. And I was lucky to, have the opportunity to have several people respond to the advertisement. And then, of course, I met with them and spoke to them, talked about, sort of what we're, trying to do, how long it would be, the kinds of work that people would be interested in if they were interested in actually jumping in and getting involved. And so 5 individuals were, sort of selected or chosen, or I don't know the appropriate word, but excited about being involved, and I was excited to work with them. So everybody that basically had expressed interest after that initial interview process was selected. And so I really wanted to challenge myself in the number of people that I was involving in a scoping review, because normally people just work with like 1 or 2 patient partners. I was like, let's do 5. There's 5 people that are really excited. Let's take them all. And so in doing so, it was really, the group of people were really diverse in terms of sex and ethnicity. They had varying experience. So some of them were like Karen. They had worked on other projects. Like Karen worked on my PhD. She hadn't done PACER yet, but she had done many other projects with Alberta Health Services as a patient advisor. Some people were brand new. They had no idea what is a patient partner. I don't even know what research, what are we researching? So there was a really great diversity of individuals. And so we just we just dove in and had some fun with the whole, like with everything. So, you know, I guess to give people sort of an understanding, there was actually 2 project teams. So there was like a patient partner team, and then there was an academic team. And I was the common person between both groups. And we worked like this initially, just because of the volume of studies that we were actually finding for this particular route. So that's how we ended up working together, just 2 separately. And then kind of as we got through and were able to eliminate some of the studies or exclude some of the studies for whatever reasons, we started to bring those 2 teams together. It was quite magical. And we'll talk a little bit about, you know, that in a couple of minutes here. But I have to say, we were able to, luckily, and I really do believe this was part of the success of this project, we were able to get together and meet face to face prior to the pandemic, but we're talking like a month prior to the pandemic. But the bond we created, we met in an accessible location. I actually met in a co-op community room. We talked about the project and the timeline, and, you know, just to make sure everybody was okay with it, they understood it. Now you can imagine, you know, you're getting all this information and then the whole world changes, right? And so all the project deliverables and timelines, like everything changed from that meeting. But we were able to, it wasn't so much about the details of the project, it was about getting to know each other. And I always like to start projects with like a common understanding, common ground. So why are people here? What are some shared, you know, rules, or not, I hate rules, the word rules just doesn't sit with me well, but some shared things that we all honor, that we're going to hold each other accountable to. And that, so how we put that together is, we had used this thing, it's called the CIHR principles of engagement. There's 4 pillars for me, like basically for meaningful engagement, which is like inclusiveness and support and gosh, I'm going by memory here, mutual respect. And I think the last one is co-building or co-design. I can't remember which the right word is, but so what do those mean? Well, they leave it that's very vague, because they want the research teams to figure out what those words mean to them. So we had conversations about that. And so, you know, we things that came out were things like flexible meetings, so appropriate training and support, and of course, having the right technology to support what they were doing. So all of these kinds of things came out in our first meeting. And the other thing that we realized is we all shared a common interest and a strong bond in including that patient family member in health research. So the people that I had mentioned that had never done a research project, when asked why they were there and why they wanted to work in the project, they just said, because I've never done anything like this before and I want to learn more. But I ultimately believe that this is how healthcare should work in the future. We should have more opportunities to be involved in these types of things. So that was our common, I call it a path on this slide, but that was the common denominator for everybody. Karen, did you want to add anything into that slide at all?
Sure. I just want to say that I think it's really important that you take the time to have that talk and that shared opportunity to experience what everybody else is feeling and what their goals are in order to create that bond. And so Tamara was really good at bringing us together and helping us discover why we were there. We each had our own individual reasons for being there, but what we developed was a group reason for doing this work. And I think that's what kept us accountable and on focus. So it's not wasted time to take the time to get to know your patient advisors and to develop that relationship. So I think that was the key to the success of this project.
Thanks, Karen. I think so too. Now, of course, I want you to meet Mr. COVID. Hey, everybody. Here. Mr. COVID loves a party. I love this part, the slow dance. So for those of you going, what is this? So in Alberta, government put out these advertisements about COVID, basically, and you know how it was transmissible, and like parties and all these gatherings and all these kinds of things. So remember, we got together for the first month, and then COVID happened, and so I think the next couple of slides I'm going to speak to is basically how we had to pivot, be flexible, figure out how we were going to work together and how we were going to salvage this project, because I hate to say it, but a scoping review in order of importance was probably like -50. You know, we had no idea what was going on with our own world, our families, we didn't know what the future was. Some people had small businesses, some people had family in other provinces. Like it was completely upside down. And so, you know, I'm just amazed we were able to get anything out of it done, but we were able to, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But the patient partners really were involved in very, very early on, the initial project meetings, the project development, the data collection, extraction, interpretation of the findings, and actually even helped with the dissemination. Karen was actually an author, a listed author on the publication. She had played a very big role in the scoping review, and I hope she'll be able to share some details about that in the next slide. I put this for Karen because, you know, she always giggles about her computer proficiency or lack thereof. I completely disagree with her. But we, you know, in that initial meeting, when people had said, you know, that they wanted the technology and they wanted, you know, the support to be able to work through these things, I think one of the biggest things was really understanding people's comfort. So the difference is we take all these things for granted, like Word and Excel. Well, some patient partners were actually more comfortable using Excel. They didn't like Word. They didn't know how to use Word. I was surprised by that, actually, because again, I think Word is a little bit more, it's basically, it's a word processing system. Excel is more like, you know, for numbers and, you know, data, and it's a little bit more finicky and clunky, but patient partners were actually a lot more comfortable with Excel than they were with Word. So we customized the tools that we had to support our project based on this information. And I think it was also really important. You know, we introduced, again, after COVID, we had sort of introduced a weekly meeting. And I think the weekly meeting, that might sound a bit daunting, but you know, as we were going through all of these studies, what we realized was there was a lot of, this was a really nuanced scoping review. And, you know, I'll talk a little bit more about why it was nuanced just in about 10 seconds here. But we needed to support each other because it wasn't as clear. It wasn't like, oh, this one's blue, we're going to put this in the blue bucket. It wasn't that easy. And so having these weekly meetings allowed us to check in with each other, support each other, and we could modify sort of the method that we use to get through all of these studies together. And I think in a very efficient and rigorous way, which I think was great. But I just wanted to speak about that training. Karen, was there anything you wanted to add about the training? I know there was a lot, you know, anyway, but we're going to talk about the spectrum in a sec, if you want to save it for that.
No, I think the training is really important because the scoping review is daunting in itself, and to have to worry about the computer programs on top of that is, to me, you're looking for an issue. And I wish I was as cute as this baby. I just have to say that. So Tamara offering us that time to sit one-on-one with her, and not sit, but be one-on-one with her on computer, really took away the pressure for me, especially because computers they're not my best friend. So even though a weekly meeting sounds daunting, it saves time later on because we all go through the process on the same wavelength. We're all able to meet together and have that discussion about where we're going. I think it saves a lot of initial problems, like a lot of problems later on in the scoping review. So I think that time is well spent.
Thanks for that. And you are as cute as that baby. So we used an IAP too. So academics always use a framework or a lens. you might have heard IAP2, the International Association of Public Participants. But what we were trying to do was understand patient as partners, like what is the concept? Because this language didn't exist. There's still a lot of confusion around the language. So we used the IAP2 spectrum as the framework. So what that meant, I think I alluded a little bit to this when I talked about the blue bucket, right? So Karen, I want you to explain like sort of some of the process that you went through. So these 3 levels that are on the slide here are the higher levels of engagement. And so, you know, the entire spectrum is inform, consult, involve, collaborate, lead, and empower. So the involve, collaborate, lead, well, it says lead, support on here, the same words, empower and support, supposed to be the same, but the top 3 levels basically is what we focused on. But how was that for you?
We found a lot of articles that had inform and consult, but that's not what we were looking for. We were looking for how patients were involved. So we would get articles that would say, okay, they belonged in a focus group, but they never clearly defined what the role was. So we had a lot of trouble putting into the buckets. Okay, was it consult? Was it involve? Did they actually do research? Were they actually involved in, you know, doing interviews and focus groups and stuff like that? So there was a lot of reading to do. You just couldn't go through the article and go, okay, that belongs to that. You had to actually read and try to interpret what they were saying. And some of the ones that we just couldn't, if I couldn't get at, and I thought, I don't get this one, I would leave it. And then we would get together and we would discuss it. And if we still couldn't figure out where to put it, it would go to another party that would make the decision. And I have to tell you, this was the hardest part, because during this, we were trying to interpret what the IAP2 spectrum was telling us was what each one of those buckets was. And because it's not defined as clearly as I would like it to have been, we were struggling with that. So what does consult mean? What does involve mean? It's different to me than it is to Tamara, to the other people. So we had to really talk it through and discuss, this is what it means for our study based on what we think it is. So there was a lot of discussion and a lot of interpretation, but I think what we found really shows what's out there. I feel very confident in that. We were able to find really good studies to show what is out there and what is not out there. So it just clarified to me the different levels. Okay, inform is, you know, you're just asked to do something or you're just told about something. And then we deliberately looked through each bucket and made a decision. It was a lot of work. It was confusing work. Tamara and I had a lot of discussions about what it meant and what it didn't. And that back and forth banter was really good for me, because not only is Tamara a knowledge of patient engagement, which she then shared with me, but my role as a patient partner and researcher was defined for me. I became a much stronger advocate because of that, that I know where I am in that space. I could feel confident in my role and therefore be able to maybe share some of that with other patient advisors or other roles that I'm in. So all that time wasn't wasted. And you're probably thinking, I just don't have all that time to do with patient partners. But I will tell you that it's important to put that time into it, because what you get out of it is gold.
Thanks for that, Karen. I mean, that was, I'm happy, like I said, we're happy to talk about this in more detail for those that want that detail, but it was definitely a very nuanced review and challenging for sure. I'm sure some of you are looking at some of the wording underneath the involve, collaborate, lead, support, like to include you as a standing member of an advisor group. Karen's being very modest. She did lead the gray literature component of this review. So I'm sorry, but taking a website or a report or something that falls under the gray literature, and you know, they don't use words like what's described under here. Like it was really challenging. But I know we did it. I want to move past this challenging piece or whatever. So we did talk about the technology. So Zoom became our lifeline. For those of you, again, during the pandemic, Zoom, like it just like came on, like it was just like university adopted, uses this Zoom when we were like using Skype and some of these other things. And we all moved over to Zoom, and you know, it's evolved and gotten better sort of during the pandemic, but it was our lifeline because it allowed us to easily collaborate and connect with each other. We used this app called Flock. I always like to tell this story. I had kind of said to everybody, you're going to want to take the notifications off because like every time somebody would say something or post something or have a conversation, it would just go like blah, 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 like just it would make these noises. Or and I remember one of our patient partners, like she was just like, flock, 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 flock. And she'd say only the F word, like flock, the F word, right? But flock, 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 flock. I can't stand that app. I hate it. I hate it. And I said, well, did you turn the notifications off? And she said, huh? And so I showed her how to do it. And I said, so how are you doing? She goes, that's changed my life because I'm not getting up in the middle of the night with these notifications from people. Anyway, sorry, I digress. But we also used Google Docs because we didn't have any other, like this was a great place for not only file storage, but sharing documents and all those other kinds of things, which again, was a bit of a lifeline for us during the pandemic and allowed us to support each other. I've talked about flexibility a number of times, even today being flexible, you know, with the presentation that we were going to deliver and how we were going to do it. I think flexibility is key when you're working with patients in general, never mind as patient partners, and making sure that they're involved in many, many aspects all along the way. But, you know, I'd mentioned the pandemic and just like the whole life changing, you know, pretty much right out from underneath us. And, you know, keeping people, it's not about keeping people motivated. Like there was a period of time that I remember our meetings were like, who cares about the scoping review? How are you doing? Like, you know, what is going on? Like, do you need anything? Do you need like groceries or like, you know, it was really trying to care about each other as people, but also acknowledge that, you know, yeah, okay, scoping review, we've all been asked to do this and we're trying to deliver on it, but really, you know, and like I said, in the grand scheme of things, it's not a huge priority. So it's fine. So it took us a little bit longer, but I think we got through it because we had this great relationship and that we cared about each other and really supported each other, probably through the hardest thing many of us will have to go through in our lifetimes. I think flexibility is the takeaway. We mentioned the regular frequent meetings and sort of what we were able to do and allowed us to be able to pivot. But I think, you know, if we look back and think about key success factors, this was definitely one of them. And we were able to pivot as needed. But one thing I wanted to talk about here is I think I mentioned two teams, the academic and the patient partner teams, and that they came together. So after we got through a lot of the garbage studies, the ones that wouldn't be included in this review, and we got that kind of a more formalized number of roughly the studies that we were going to look at in much, much more detail and that we were actually going to extract the data from, the two teams came together. And at that time, it was the summer. And so I know that we had some students. And the really interesting thing for me was that the students had exactly the same challenges with the scoping review that the patient partners were having. So those bucket assignments were really challenging. So bringing the two teams together, it was magical because the patient partners were actually explaining to the students, you know, how they navigated and got through things and how they were thinking that, how they could identify different studies and different components or characteristics in the studies. And I know the students describe it as the best summer job or experience that they ever had because they never get an opportunity to work with a patient partner. And so this was, you know, like probably their first and hopefully not last experience working with patient partners. And the patient partners, loved the energy, and they were just so impressed by the students. And, you know, like meeting people that are going into, you know, these different areas of studies, or thinking about doing master's degrees or PhDs later on, or becoming doctors, or, you know, was nice to see. And we really gelled, I think, when everybody finally did come together. And it was just this, yeah, we took all the learnings from during the pandemic from the patient partners, and then we just had this amazing comfort, and were able to get through the review quite efficiently, and well, we all survived. So so that is that. And then, of course, I just wanted to sort of digress a little bit, but also important, and something that we found out. So I'd mentioned that initial kickoff meeting. And so during my PhD, and Karen would know about this work as well, because obviously she was instrumental in that, is we really worked to find, you know, why do patients get involved in healthcare decision making? Like, what is their motivation for doing this? And so I incorporated that into my understanding. So just a quick lesson on the motivation. So that's how we found how patients, how they're finding meaning in what they do. So what's important to them? And so there were 7 motivations that were identified, but by understanding that and incorporating it into the postdoctoral work, I was able to help the patient partners by, like, so for example, I'll give you an example because it's easier to understand. So like there was a patient partner who was motivated by learning new things. Okay, so that was important to them. So you can imagine, you know, if the researcher knows and is aware of this, by creating opportunities for that patient partner to learn or discover, or, you know, learn a new skill or a new program, that they would be energized and motivated by doing that. And so when you can start to recognize some of those pieces, it not only validates how patient partners feel about the project, but it also it really feeds into like their satisfaction with what you're doing, and also whether or not they want to continue, because again, they're just like, no, I see real value in this. Like, I'm going to choose to do this because I can see the difference I'm making. I know that I'm having an impact, right? So it's really that two-way communication. But I just wanted to mention that because I thought it was an important component. So we talked about challenges with the spectrum. There was a couple of things like additional time. And I mentioned the relationship that we established early on, which I think was really important. The different levels of training. Karen, you know, had spoken to this sort of early days about how important it was from her perspective. And of course, you know, thinking about the gray literature and thinking about, you know, Karen and the patient partners when they were working through this, like, you know, each website is so unique and different. Like, I remember one of the training sessions, as silly as this sounds, was, you know, explaining about, you know, like if they had a magnifying glass for a search tool function on the website or not, and that they could appear in different parts of the website. And like, it's things that were as simple as that were things that we talked about, because there was no consistent website. And so every new website that the patient partners found or had to look through, it was challenging. And it was like, well, how far do we go in the search fields? What if they don't have a search option? Like, how do we navigate through this? And so it's almost like we had to customize, you know, like these different training ops. So there's the academic version, and then there's the gray literature version, and then there's the website, and then there, you know, so there was this was an interesting project for sure. And I think it speaks to, you know, really being able to figure out what your team members need, and then being able to deliver on that. Just things as like differences between Microsoft and Apple. Like, these are all things you don't think of, but they came up. I mentioned, you know, the Flock app and all these other pieces, and Google Docs. Some people were familiar with Google Docs, some people weren't. But the technology really was what made this project sing. And I don't think we would have been able to get through it during the pandemic without some of these tools. So I don't know if you have anything else to add, Karen, on the.
Yeah, you said it all, but I think for the patient partner, as simple as it sounds about the search key and it was really a challenge at the beginning until we got into the flow of things. So to find if there are any, articles there, or, you had to figure out how to dig into each website. And so it became really important to know what you were looking for. So again, that discussion piece, make sure that everybody is on the same page and it's clear about what the search terms are and what they're looking for, because it makes it so much easier. So for the first couple of times I was doing it, I was like, okay, no. So I'm going to let Tamara down, and I can't do this. But we got there. And I think it was through perseverance and support. Like Tamara said, I can't stress support enough. Just be there for the patient partner. I think that's the easiest thing that I can say is just be there and open that door to communication and acknowledge that we all come from a different space and we all have our own reasons for being there. And if you can put that together in a way of reaching the patient partner, it really makes the work, as I said, gold before. So yeah, you just have to be flexible and be aware of there's things that are going to come up that you don't actually have time for, but it's important to make that time to make that connection.
Awesome. Thanks for Karen. Okay, now we're I think there's these are the highlights from the scoping review, but this is the last couple of slides here. I didn't want to not talk about all the work. Like we talked about the how, as I mentioned, which is usually doesn't ever show up in the academic literature. There's a reason for that. But I was lucky that we had an opportunity to actually be able to describe that, and that a journal actually published it, because it also doesn't happen very often. Because I think that's actually really important, because I think a lot of people, especially those researchers that are on the Zoom call, they're thinking it's great, Tamara, that you're talking about this, and Karen, you're talking about it from your perspective and how it helped, but we don't learn how to do this. You don't learn how to do these things in a PhD or in a master's. So it's nice to be able to put this into the academic space so that people can go, oh, look at all the things they thought about and how they supported each other. I didn't even know to think about some of these things. And we haven't even talked about, sort of some of the compensation struggles with university systems and those kinds of things. And so, again, happy to talk about that in the questions. But anyway, I digress. So it's important that this work is published, because this is how people are going to start to see and recognize how to begin working with patient partners. So as far as the scoping review went, I think, if I recall correctly, we had about 13,000 studies, academic studies that had come up in our search. And this is when I had talked about those two separate teams, because we were working through the volume of studies. And then I had mentioned that we brought everybody together. And so the final number of included studies in this particular scoping area was 119. So for anybody that's done sort of a systematic review of anything, or some sort of an evidence synthesis, knows that being able to, we call it synthesis. So you've got 119 studies. How are you going to organize them and make sense of them? So we had organized and made sense according to the IAP2 buckets, right? So we talked about that we put all these studies in these different buckets. But we also looked at things like we used the CIHR framework to look at what was the purpose of the patient partner engagement, right? So why was the researcher, what was the purpose for the patient partner involvement? And so we themed all these different, the different levels of, or the different reasons for involvement. And we found things like some researchers just wanted to advance the field, the study of patient and public involvement. They wanted to have more relevant research. They wanted to try their skills, or they wanted to figure out, I've never co-built anything, so I want to see what it's like to co-build with patients. Some were, we need to create opportunities for patients to be involved in research. So it was a capacity building, the purpose was for capacity building. And then there was also like the impact on the research in general. So I mentioned the relevance, but some researchers didn't realize the significance of the patient involvement and what it actually did on the research. So they again wanted to create these opportunities to involve patients so that they could do this. So those were kind of some of the themes that came out. Then we also looked at the reported outcomes for each of the studies. And so we use the CIHR framework, well, the strategy actually, sorry, they don't call it a framework, it's strategy, sort of as a lens. So just to, like there's inclusive mechanisms and processes, multi-way capacity building and multi-way communication and collaboration, experiential knowledge of patients valued as evidence, and patient-informed and directed research, which you can imagine, which is on the higher level of the spectrum, right? And then, of course, we also, and a shared sense of purpose. I think that's the last one. So we looked at, and we were able to find each of these, the engagement activities described in the paper, so we could organize it. That's another layer of organizing by purpose, or sorry, by outcome. And then we also found two additional outcomes that weren't captured by the CIHR strategy, and it was a shared sense of purpose, which is described by participants working together. Oh, sorry, I already said that one. We found two new ones, which is improved health outcomes. So some of the patient partners actually reported that they felt, because of the additional knowledge and understanding that they had learned themselves, that it actually had an impact on their overall health, and they were able to manage their health better because of it. And then we also had improved research design. So a lot of researchers had said patient involvement actually impacted the study design itself. So their input, their lived experience, their perspective, or even their own professional backgrounds helped to create a methodology or a process, like how the study was done, and it was greatly improved. So I thought that was really interesting as well. And then, of course, we looked at the strategies that were used to support patients, like during the engagement. And so things like meetings and collecting and analyzing data were sort of kind of the common strategies that were used. And so you can see, like, even in our own study, that's what ended up happening. We talked about the meetings, like that was the common in all of the studies that we found. It was the most common strategy, actually, the extra meetings that were taken. Now, I gave you the QR code. There is an appendices in that article. It's I believe it's appendix 5. That is the table which describes and organizes the 119 studies that we found, and I believe it's 65 pages. And so I recommend each of you take a look at that. That is the gold from our scoping review. It really talks about, like, if you're looking for like a lower end of the spectrum, right? So I just want to involve patients in like a patient advisory committee. You can just look at the patient advisory committee studies, or I'm actually really, really interested in involving patients in the higher level of engagement described by the Empower. I want patients as partners. I want them actually to lead these research. Like, you can look at all the studies that highlight that, or you could just sort of go, I'm interested in the strategies that were used, or like, just to sort of understand the nuances and the differences. Again, it's all in that scoping review. And so there's a lot of detail and a lot of information, I think, but obviously I'm very biased, and Karen, I'm sure you are too. Did you have anything else you wanted to add, Karen, about that? Yeah, it's just more the results of the scoping review, because I want to get into the questions. I guess the so what is, co-designing engagement strategies to support patient partners really helped not only gain the buy-in, but also the support during the entire project, as Karen actually very succinctly mentioned. And having that involvement early on, like developing the research question and the search terms, really broadened our understanding of how patients were involved as partners, and helped capture a broader amount of studies that I think we wouldn't have included. We would have just eliminated them, because again, the nuances with the IEP2 spectrum, I think we actually included more. Karen led the great literature component, as mentioned, which I also think gave her another level of confidence that she subsequently has carried on and is doing some great things and some great work. And as mentioned, has done the PACER program. There's like a literature component in the PACER program. So I think she was like, oh yeah, I've done this before. Boy, like, look out world, here I come. But these opportunities build that confidence. And so, and then of course, again, we've said this like many, many times, but the customized training really, I think, not only demonstrates that you're committed to working with patients, partners, but you're also there to support them and help them. And so I think that comfort and that it's like it's almost a vulnerability. So it helps to really build that relationship, but also patient partners also realize, oh, hey, Tamara doesn't know everything either. We really truly are figuring this out together. And so I'm going to leave it on that note. And like I said, I want to get into the questions, but if you want to contact us, and Sumit, I think you send the slides out too, but I included it on the presentations just so people had it. So Karen and I put our email addresses and on there. And then of course, I just want to thank all these people. There's our student teams, and of course our patient partner teams. And yeah, we had a great group of people involved in this project. So anyway,